The little girl's name was Charlotte, and she was 6 years old. To the world, she was a princess, a tiny figure who waved from balconies and held her father's hand during public walks. But in the private halls of Kensington Palace, she was simply Lottie, a child who still believed in magic and the absolute goodness of her parents. Her world was one of gilded toys and long, echoing corridors, but its sun and moon was her mother, Catherine. In Charlotte's eyes, the Princess of Wales could do no wrong. Her mother's hair smelled of summer gardens, her hands were always gentle when braiding Charlotte's hair, and her laugh was the warmest sound in the world. That particular afternoon had been rainy, confining the children indoors. Charlotte, bored with her puzzles, had decided to explore the less frequented parts of the palace with her brother Louis. They were playing a game of hide-and-seek, their giggles echoing off the ancient stone walls. Charlotte, searching for the perfect hiding spot, had wandered down a narrow service corridor meant for staff. She found a small alcove behind a heavy tapestry, a perfect secret nook. She squeezed in, holding her breath, listening for Louis's footsteps. But instead of her brother, she heard the low murmur of adult voices coming from a nearby room, the door left inadvertently ajar. It was a small sitting room where staff sometimes took their breaks. Charlotte didn't mean to eavesdrop, but she was just waiting, being quiet. She recognized the voices of 2 women who worked in the palace, their tones hushed and conspiratorial. At first, the words were just a blur of sound, but then a sentence, sharp and clear, cut through the air. One of the women, the one with the sharper voice, was talking about the princess. "Honestly, have you seen her lately?" the woman whispered. "A right state she is, just skin and bone. And it's not natural." The other woman murmured something Charlotte couldn't catch, but the first one continued, her voice laced with a cruel kind of pity. "It's that diet, I reckon. Or something else. Trying to be perfect for all those cameras. You mark my words, it's not right. She looks dreadful, positively ill. He must be worried sick having to see her like that every day." Charlotte's small body went rigid. Skin and bone, dreadful, ill. These words were like shards of glass, and they were talking about her beautiful, strong, wonderful mother. The woman's tone was not one of concern, but of gossip, of spreading something ugly. Charlotte felt a hot prickle of tears behind her eyes, but she forced them back. A confusing mix of emotions flooded her. Fierce, protective anger at the women for saying such terrible things, and a cold, creeping dread. Was it true? Was her mother sick? Was she dreadful to look at? She thought of her mother's face, the face she kissed goodnight. And it was the most beautiful face in the world. How could anyone say that? She heard Louis's footsteps approaching and the call of "ready or not." But she couldn't move. She stayed frozen in her alcove until she heard the women's voices fade and a door click shut. Only then did she creep out, her game forgotten. She found Louis, but her heart wasn't in it. She was quiet during tea, pushing her food around her plate. When her mother came to tuck them in that night, Charlotte studied her with new, anxious eyes. She looked for the skin and bone. She stared at her mother's slender wrists and the gentle hollow of her cheeks. For the first time, they didn't look beautiful to her. They looked fragile, like a bird's bones. Her mother's smile was as warm as ever, but Charlotte thought she saw a shadow of tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The poisonous seed had been planted. The following days were agony for the little princess. The cruel words echoed in her head, distorting her view of her mother. She became hypervigilant, watching Catherine with an intensity that was far beyond her years. During a public engagement, when she saw her mother waving from a car, she didn't see the radiant woman the crowd adored. Instead, she squinted, trying to see what the palace women had seen. She thought her mother's collarbone looked a little too prominent above her dress. When Catherine came home and laughed while telling William a funny story about a mishap with a dignitary, Charlotte noticed how tired her voice sounded at the end of the day. The love was still there, a deep, burning river in her heart, but it was now mixed with a current of terror. The fear was a physical weight on her small chest, a constant low-level hum of anxiety. She became clingier, refusing to leave her mother's side when she was home. She would bring her small, treasured toys, a painted rock, a worn, stuffed rabbit, pressing them into her mother's hands as if they were talismans that could offer protection. Catherine, attributing it to a normal phase, would simply hold her tight, unaware of the storm raging in her daughter's heart. Charlotte wanted to ask, to scream, "Mummy, are you sick? Are you going to go away?" But the words were locked inside her, held captive by a child's fear that speaking the terrible thing might make it come true. It was a Tuesday evening, and the usual bedtime routine was underway. Louis was already asleep, his small form a peaceful lump under his duvet. William was in charge tonight, as Catherine had a late meeting. He sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed, the room lit by the soft glow of a single star-shaped lamp. He smelled of the fresh outdoors and a faint hint of his cologne. It was a safe smell, a daddy smell. "Right, Poppet," he said, his voice a gentle rumble. "Story. Your choice. The adventures of the naughty squirrel again, or the one about the dragon who was scared of mice?" Normally, Charlotte would have giggled and chosen the squirrel, but tonight she just stared at him, her blue eyes, so like his own, wide and glistening in the dim light. The dam of her silence, built over days of worry, finally began to crack. She didn't answer his question. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice so small it was almost lost in the quiet room. But William's playful expression softened instantly. He knew that tone. It was the tone she used when she'd had a nightmare. He moved closer, brushing a curl from her forehead. "What is it, Lottie?" "Bad dream." She shook her head, a single fat tear escaping and tracing a path down her temple and into her hair. "No, it wasn't a dream." She took a shuddering breath, the words she'd been holding inside tumbling out in a rush. "I heard some ladies talking, in the palace. They said they said she's skin and bone. They said she looks dreadful, that she's ill. Daddy, is Mummy sick? Is she going to die?" The words hung in the air between them, stark and horrifying. William felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. For a moment, he was a deer in the headlights, a husband blindsided by the sheer cruelty of the world, filtered through the innocent ears of his 6-year-old daughter. He saw the raw terror in her eyes, the trembling of her lower lip, and a fierce, protective rage ignited within him. Not at her, never at her, but at the careless, thoughtless people whose gossip had done this. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, feeling the frantic beat of her little heart against his chest. "Oh, my sweet girl," he murmured into her hair, his own voice thick with emotion. "No, no, no, no. That is not true. None of it is true." He pulled back just enough to look into her face, and his own expression earnest and full of love. He had to choose his words with the utmost care. He couldn't lie to her, but he had to dismantle the cruel narrative she'd constructed. He thought of Catherine, of the private battles she fought, of the pressure she was under, of the way she sometimes looked tired, yes, but also of the indomitable spirit that shone through. He had to explain it in a way a 6-year-old could understand, without burdening her with the complexities of adult life. "And listen to me, Charlotte," he said, using her full name, a signal that this was serious. "Your mummy is not sick. I promise you with all my heart she is not dying. Do you believe me?" Charlotte, still sniffling, looked into her father's steady, honest eyes. She wanted to believe him more than anything in the world. She gave a tiny, hesitant nod. William took a deep breath. Your mommy works very, very hard. Harder than almost anyone I know. She has a big job, helping people, and sometimes that means she gets very tired. And sometimes when people work very hard and get very tired, they might look a little different. Their face might look a bit more tired than usual. He chose his words with surgical precision. He couldn't mention the public pressure, the scrutiny, the impossible standards of beauty she was held to. He had to simplify it. But that tiredness, he continued, tapping her chest gently, is only on the outside. It's not an illness. On the inside. She is the strongest person I know. She is full of love and life and happiness, especially for you and your brothers. You are what gives her strength. He saw the fear beginning to recede in her eyes, replaced by a desperate hope. He knew he needed to address the cruelty of the words themselves. Now, what those ladies said, he said, his voice firm but not angry, was very, very unkind. It was a silly and horrible thing to say. Some people say things without thinking about how much they might hurt someone. They don't see the real person. They don't see your mummy. They just see a picture. You, Lottie. You see the real mummy. You see her when she's laughing so hard she cries, when she's building Lego towers with you, when she's singing silly songs at bath time. That is the real her, not what some silly, thoughtless people whisper in a corridor. Charlotte was listening intently, and her small fists no longer clenched so tightly. The poison was beginning to be neutralized by the antidote of her father's love and truth. He had made her feel seen and heard. "Do you remember last week?" William asked, a soft smile playing on his lips. "When you and Mummy made those absolutely disastrous biscuits? The ones that looked like blobs?" A tiny smile flickered across Charlotte's tear-streaked face. "They were dinosaurs," she corrected him quietly. "That's right. A green Blobosaurus rexes," he chuckled. "And do you remember how Mummy got flour all over her nose and didn't even care because she was laughing so hard with you?" Charlotte nodded, the memory warming the cold spot in her heart. That was her mother, the flour-dusted, laughing mother, not the skin and bone woman in the cruel gossip. "That," William said, tapping her nose gently, "is your mummy. That's who she is. And that person is strong and healthy and loves you more than the moon and the stars and all the silly old biscuits in the world." He wrapped his arms around her again, and this time Charlotte's hug was fierce with relief. The terrifying weight had been lifted. Her father had caught her as she fell, and he had made the world right again. "But, Daddy," she mumbled against his shirt, a final wisp of anxiety. "Why do people say mean things?" William sighed, a deep, weary sound. And it was the hardest question of all. "I don't know, my love. I wish I did. Some people have sad, small hearts, and they try to make themselves feel bigger by saying unkind things about others. But we don't have to listen to them. We know the truth. The truth is in here," he said, placing his hand over her heart. "And in here," he said, placing her small hand over his own heart. "And the truth is that our family loves each other, and we are all going to be just fine." He tucked her in. She kissed her forehead and hummed a few bars of her favorite lullaby. Within minutes, the tension had drained from her body, and she was asleep, her face peaceful at last. William stayed for a long time, watching her, the rage at the gossip mongers still simmering, but tempered by a profound sense of relief. He had been given a chance to protect his daughter's heart, and he had taken it. Later that night, after his own meeting had ended, Catherine slipped into the bedroom. William was still awake, but staring at the ceiling. She slid into bed beside him, sensing his tension immediately. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. "The children go down okay?" William turned to her, his eyes full of a complex mix of love, anger, and sadness. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, the gesture infinitely tender. He then relayed the entire story, Charlotte's whispered fears, the cruel words she had overheard, the conversation they'd had. As he spoke, Catherine's face went through a series of transformations, shock, pain, and then a deep, aching sorrow, not for herself, but for her little girl, for the innocence that had been so carelessly chipped away. She didn't cry, but her eyes shone with unshed tears. She leaned into William, and he held her, the two of them united in their love for their child and their shared resolve. The next morning, Charlotte woke up to a world that felt right again. The sun was shining, and the memory of her fear was like a fading dream. When her mother came into her room to help her get dressed, Charlotte didn't stare at her wrists or her collarbone. Instead, she launched herself at Catherine for a hug, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of summer gardens. Catherine held her just a moment longer than usual, stroking her hair. She didn't mention the conversation. She didn't need to. Her presence, her warmth, her very real, alive, and unloving self was the only proof Charlotte needed. The truth was in the simple, everyday moments, the shared breakfast, the gentle brush of her mother's hand as she fastened a button, the sound of her laughter echoing through the palace corridors. The seed of cruelty had been planted, but the deep, strong roots of familial love had pulled it out before it could truly grow. Princess Charlotte had learned a harsh lesson about the world. But she had also learned an even more powerful one about the unwavering strength and truth of the love that held her small, gilded world together. And that lesson she would carry with her forever.